Every 3 years, we get that beautiful snapshot from the Acts of the Apostles of the life of the early Christian community, where they were of one mind and one heart. There was no needy person among them, for those who owned property or houses would sell them, and they were distributed to each according to need. And that's an admirable image to see, where no one is in need, that it shows forth an active charity. But I want to take this opportunity today to speak clearly about what the church does not mean by it, but then also what the church does intend by this image of the early Christians. And so in speaking about what the church does not understand by it, I'll be referencing Leo XIII's encyclical Rerum Novarum. And then to speak about how the church does understand this, I'll speak about the Evangelical Council of Poverty. And so Rerum Novarum was written by Leo XIII in 1891 and given to the church. And it was in part a response to the socialists of their day that were following the teaching of Karl Marx and Marxism and communism. And when we apply it to today, it's important to consider definitions, but then also in the first principles that Pope Leo as a loving father gave to us. Now, be assured, at that time in the Industrial Revolution, there were many deplorable working conditions that Leo recognizes. That with the advent of factories, family members would be separated from their parents would be separated from their children for long hours in the factory. There would often be unsafe conditions, and sometimes the pay was not good. And so he had to respond to that. But he was also responding to the socialists of his day. And again, definitions. How did he understand the socialists? Leo XIII spoke of them as the socialists working on the poor man's envy of the rich, are striving to do away with private property, and contend that individual possessions should become the common property of all, to be administered by the state or municipal bodies. And so that's what Leo understands by the socialists. And he says that what they propose is flat out wrong for 3 reasons. One is he recognizes a right to private property. A second is that their plans, their intentions would disrupt family life even further and the priority that belongs to family life. And then he observes that their proposed solutions would actually make conditions more miserable. And so to look through, what is it that Leo XIII, the Pope of the time, as a loving father, wanted to give to his church? First, he recognized that if you work your tail off, you should enjoy the fruits of your labor. If you work your tail off, you should enjoy the fruits of your labor. That's a common idea of natural law. And so Leo said, and the best way that we recognize that is through private property. And so the proposal to do away with private property would go against that we would not be able to enjoy the fruits of our labor, where we invest our time, we invest our energy, we invest ourselves. We should be able to enjoy the benefit of that for ourselves, for our family members, for those who are dear to us. And so Leo puts that in place. And then in the encyclical, Leo also talks about how the family is prior to the state. And this is critical. This is critical. Or sometimes the church will talk about it as subsidiarity. But the values that we need to live together well are handed on in the family. They're handed on in the family. And that's before any type of state, any type of governance outside of the family. And as such, the family has certain rights and duties that are sacred to the family. that would be violated by the proposals of the socialists of his day. And I mean, it's hard for us to get our head around this, in the West, where we do have a long Christian inheritance of reflecting on individual rights. But we do see this. I mean, even in the West, there's been a few cases where a child would be removed from their family because the values that the parents were handing on were not in step or in vogue with the particular government of that time. Or we see it more dramatically in China, where in order to destroy the Uyghurs, they'll actually remove children from their homes so they can't receive their parents' values, or they'll sterilize the women so that they can't hand on through the family the values that are dear to them. And so Pope Leo XIII in 1891 recognized that the contention that civil government should, at its option, intrude into and exercise intimate control of the family and the household is a pernicious error. And so the socialists of their day would destroy the family, and they would go against the sacred rights that belong to the family. And then Leo XIII recognized that, if they were to put their effects into practice, the door would be thrown open to envy, to mutual invective, and to discord. The sources of wealth themselves would run dry, for no one would have interest in exerting his talents or his industry. And I mean, we've seen, and that Leo spoke that in 1891, and it played out. It's played out in Venezuela and the fall of the Soviet Union, that it just doesn't work. And as a loving Father, he wanted to set that before us. And so what did Leo propose? In terms of making it right, one of the first things he talked about is that, he envisions that, owners and laborers would work together. I mean, he was speaking to a very Christian society where there was this understanding of love for your neighbor. And it was also easier before that, because that was before corporations made ownership a very vague idea. But we do see laudable examples of that vision that Leo proposed, where the owners have a genuine solicitude for the people who work for them. And one of their biggest pains is when they have to lay off staff because they can no longer afford them. That's the solicitude that Leo calls for. Also in Rerum Novarum, then he speaks of laborers having the right to form unions so that they can speak up, make their needs known. And he also speaks of a just wage. So as Leo recognizes the shortcomings of the socialists of his day, he also recognizes there are genuine needs that need to be met. And so I'm hoping that that just allows you to have some clarity with regard to what the Catholic Church teaches. What is the authoritative position of the Catholic Church in this matter? So what was that we heard about in the Acts of the Apostles? There was no needy person among them. For those who owned property or houses would sell them, and they were distributed to each according to need. That's the Evangelical Counsel of Poverty. And notice that it's an evangelical counsel. It's not a mandate. We have commandments which we're obliged to follow. A counsel it's saying that this is very good, it's worthy of pursuit, but it's not part of the minimum requirements. And this evangelical counsel of poverty, it exists, we see it exists most strongly in the religious life, in religious communities. And here it does work. It's a beautiful testimony to us of an active charity. And what is it about religious life that makes this work well? First of all, everyone in that community is directed toward God. their goal is the Lord. Or as we heard in the Acts of the Apostles, they were of one mind and one heart. And we can't arrive at that without having one God or one story. And so the religious communities they're all looking to the Lord together. And that's why they're able to set it up. And we also notice that in the religious communities, they take vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience. And in that context, this life of the early church works. And it stands as a beautiful witness to a genuine and active charity. You know, the Second Vatican Council, in speaking of the Evangelical Council, said that those who make a profession of the Evangelical Councils should seek and love above all else God, who has first loved us. We heard something of that in our second reading from John. In all circumstances, they should take care to foster the hidden life of Christ in God, which is the source and stimulus of love of neighbor, for the salvation of the world and the building up of the church. And even the very practice of the Evangelical Councils is animated and governed by this charity. So at its heart is charity. Not envy, not a mandate, but an active charity. You know, and so God, even today, calls some of us to the religious life and the living out of the Evangelical Councils. But we might take a moment then to see that there is a beauty in this Evangelical Council of Poverty, to just consider what would that mean for us in our own state in life. And the simplest way is just to recognize, to be discerning, to intentionally distinguish between needs and wants, and to live frugally in that regard, so that the blessings that God bestows upon us are available for the building up of the church, for the building up of the community, are available for an act of charity. And so today, you know, we hear every 3 years this reading from the Acts of the Apostles, and it is admirable. There were no needy among them. That is admirable as a witness to active charity. We need to recognize that the church has never proposed the selling of property to distribute according to need. The church has never proposed that as an economic mandate or an economic principle, but rather as a witness of a real and active charity, made in freedom and in pursuit of following Christ. And so each of us today, may we rejoice in the great legacy that we have as members of the Catholic Church, to see the witness of the first Christians, to see the witness of the religious communities who live these evangelical councils as a way of pointing themselves and all to Christ Jesus and to his active charity.